Apparently we are various people. Hello. We're not scientists or us at all, we're just people that were waiting at the bus stop and just thought we'd wander in. Hi. My name is Susan Morrison, and according to this I am what was I again?
Illustrious.
I was illustrious, which makes me sound like an aircraft carrier. It was an aircraft carrier actually. Amongst other things, I work at the Stand Comedy Club, but I'm also somebody who's involved in a thing called the Cabaret of Dangerous Ideas during the Fringe, where we bring researchers out to discuss their ideas with the general public during the Fringe, which is always exciting, if a bit sweaty, I think. I am the chair, so I'll be firing some questions out, and then I think about 6:45 we'll get time for some Q&A of you guys as well, perhaps even earlier than that, if the conversation dries up. But I don't think it will, because these are extremely interesting people, and we're going to get them to introduce themselves. You'll notice that there's somebody joining us remotely, like a Bond villain from his lair. So we'll come to Michael last, if that's okay. So we'll start here with Bill, if you just want to tell us who you are and where you're from.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Susan. I'm Bill Addison. I work at Edinburgh Science, and we do the Edinburgh Science Festival each year. And as well as that, so that's just for 2 weeks in Easter, but we do tons of work all around the rest of the year. We do a lot of work overseas. We do the Abu Dhabi Science Festival each year. We do touring exhibitions and things, and we're increasingly active in the kind of climate space as well, trying to promote discussions and conversations around that.
Thank you.
I'm Nicola Osborne. I'm Programme Manager for Creative Informatics, which supports creative people to do new stuff with data and data-driven innovation. And so there's various people in the room who will be able to tell you more about their projects and things in that space, actually, because this is also one of the projects funded by Creative Informatics. I'm also the manager of the Institute for Design Informatics, which we are sat in. So that's me. I'm also a coding performer as well. How many of you said it?
Great coding performer. Absolutely brilliant. Fantastic. You get hecklers, she just hits them. It's amazing.
Recording in progress.
As if by magic.
As if by magic. There's the heckler.
Revenge.
Go get her. That voice is really creepy, isn't it? We should have got used to it. Yeah, thank you very much. Gemma.
Hello everyone, I'm Gemma Lawrence. I work with a charity called Creative Scotland, which focuses on supporting, promoting and harnessing the role of our arts and cultural sector in addressing the climate emergency. So I met Jonathan through an arts and science networking session which we were running, was it this year? Earlier this year? So we do a lot of, I suppose, supporting collaborations between artists and people working on climate change, which obviously includes scientists, but also includes policymakers, people working in different institutions and communities. So yeah, looking forward to discussing the sort of nature of those collaborations and the kinds of support that we provide.
Thanks very much. Jonathan.
I'm Jonathan Elders. So I am an artist who's found a bit of a home for myself in the scientific community over the last few years. It's been great, there's been many opportunities. It's been quite a complicated process with a lot of learning, and I'm interested, like I say, in supporting having a facility for artists who are interested in reaching out to the scientific community so that they can become more informed before they make those kind of first steps. And there are lots of good institutions, as several of the panellists represent, who will help facilitate artists and scientists working together. But I think key to the process is perhaps offering information before people do even connect or reach out, and give people as much support as they can to be informed and see the whole kind of journey and what's involved, and hopefully give them the confidence to take those kind of first steps. So that's the basis of Cognition Arts. Yes, so we've got the event here tonight, like I was saying, to discuss all the points further, and I'm interested to see what comes out of it. Thank you.
And now, from his lair somewhere, actually he's been trapped by strikes, I think. I think we've got Michael. Michael?
Hello. So I'm Mikey Jarrell, and I'm the Public Engagement Manager at the Institute of Physics in Scotland. We're a membership organisation that represent physicists and support physics in all its many forms. And one strand of that work that I'm responsible for in Scotland is public engagement, as well as running our own public activities for our member physicists with audiences all around Scotland. We also, including a science festival in Glasgow called the Big Bounce. We also run a public engagement grant scheme to support projects that improve the attitude of the public to physics, whether that's creative or from the public engagement world or from the academic world. And we've, in the last year or two, been actively reaching out to creatives to apply to our fund via supporting them and pairing them with physicists to put applications in for public engagement projects. We run a continuous rolling fund of small pots of £2,500. Also, just while it's still on me, I can't really hear what anyone's saying, so you might have to go back to the 2 mic shuffle, I'm afraid, guys, sorry. Especially if you're recording, it's not going to pick it up. Sorry, Susan.
Not at all. I will, at my advanced age. Good Lord, this is a workout for the biceps. Honestly, that's a hefty piece of equipment. I wouldn't like to smack somebody with that thing. Well, actually, I might come to think of it. There are a few people in Asda the other day that could have taken a right smack over the head with that. Thank you very much, Michael. Now, we had a really interesting workshop earlier on today where a lot of fascinating subjects were addressed and ideas were raised. But I want to kind of start with something that we did talk about. I'm going to start on this side with Nicola and with Bill. And I'm going to start with you, Bill, actually, so I'll have to hand you the microphone. Mm-hmm. And it's the Science Festival. How do you reach out to artists, or how do they reach out to you?
Thank you. How do we reach out to artists? I suppose the first way we do a big open call for participation every year. Our Science Festival happens at Easter each year in the school holidays, and we start off the process back in kind of summer the year before, sort of June, July, August time. We release an open call that goes out to all of the networks, everyone that we can think of that we know about. And so that will go out, it'll appear on our website. It goes out to groups like Creative Informatics or to any other, artist network groups that we can think of, but it's also fully open to individuals and so on. And we try and describe there what it is we're looking for. And we are usually looking for, and this is something we've talked a bit about today, we're usually looking for finished pieces that we can exhibit rather than new pieces that don't exist yet that we can commission. That's not a hard and fast rule at all by any means. It depends on what kind of pots we've got going on, what kind of funding we've got available and so on. But generally, that's how it works. We do an open call or a call for submission for ideas for anyone who's available and who has heard of it. And there's the rub. How do you actually hear about it? And traditionally that goes out, like I say, in the summer, but occasionally we have different projects going on throughout the year where we would reach out in different ways.
Nicola, it's very much part of your job as well, isn't it? Reaching out to the artistic community and bringing them in. But how do you do that?
I think for us, we've been funding sort of creative data-driven work, including lots of products and service experiences. Some of it's artistic work, some of it's creative products of a different kind of type. Sometimes it's new performances and things. To reach the kind of community we want to reach, we kind of started by looking at what was already there in terms of creative communities. So trying to reach out through Creative Scotland kind of website, trying to reach out through networks that we're aware of, trying to reach out to the sort of techie end of the creative landscape, as well as the more artistic end. We cover all the different creative industries, so it's lots of different communities. So we try and kind of do a lot of signposting across those communities. And because we've been around now for about 3 years, coming to our 4th year, we do now have our own community as well. So we now have a good set of people to kind of flag opportunities to. So yeah, it's been through very kind of classical stuff. It's like websites for opportunities, it's mailing lists, it's social media, but it's also been a lot of scouting around to find all the different places we might be looking for funding opportunities. And then because we've been going for a while, there's now word of mouth. But because we're one of those projects that only is around for a certain period of time, will disappear, and then someone else has to start it all up again. So we're trying to make sure that there is a much more graceful transition than that. So the community doesn't lose those accesses to our stuff, but also other stuff we've been pointing them towards, other funding opportunities and things.
Graceful transition. I do like the sound of good. Jamila, you were telling me of a very interesting project you were involved with, some maritime conservation. And how exactly did that come about, and how did you bring the artists into that?
Yep. So I was describing a project called Seas of the Outer Hebrides, which we were involved in for 3-4 years. So that actually came about through Nature Scot, who are sort of Scotland's nature conservation agency. one of their marine policy officers got in touch with us, and he had a real interest in, I suppose, using more creative approaches to engaging communities, particularly in issues around marine protected areas, which are these conservation areas which have been set up in our seas to help protect particular species and habitats, which I think it's fair to say there's been quite a lot of challenges around how those conservation areas have been set up, tended to be quite top down and not terribly participatory in terms of engaging communities. So they were looking for a kind of whole different approach as to how they would do this. They came across our work, which is really focused around this building connections across different sectors, including between artists and people working on climate change in different ways. So we helped them to kind of shape the brief, if you like. That's one of the things we often get involved in at that early stage of saying, you know, what are the kind of aims and ambitions of this project, and how can we sort of shape a brief that an artist or multiple artists could respond to. So that project, the funding kind of came in sort of pockets and dribs and drabs. So we ran a number of open calls. We also just got in touch with local arts organisations based there and asked them to kind of recommend artists who they were working with, because that's, I think, particularly important when you're working in a place to say, you know, we're a national organisation, we don't necessarily have those links at a local level. So making those relationships, you know, at a very local level and saying, you know best your audiences, you know best your artists, so can we work together on this? But in another instance, we ran an open call where we kind of specified a range of skills and approaches that we were looking for, and, you know, ran a fairly standard sort of recruitment process around that. So it's a bit of a mix depending on what's needed.
Lovely. Before I come back to you, Jonathan, I'm going to go to Michael. And if he's, are you there? Are you there?
I am.
And how do you reach out to the artistic community? You put me in the Barra's ballroom, as I recall.
Did. Yeah. Yeah, that's our Glasgow festival in the East End at the Barrowlands. We thought we'd use the place in the daytime for a change to do some things in. And I remember you managed to get a wee dance in at the end, Susan.
I did,
even though it was about 3 p.m. Yeah.
It's never too early to disco. That's what I say.
How do we reach creative audiences? Well, through the Creative Scotland message board was a opportunities board was obviously the obvious one, but I was surprised that it hadn't been done before, and that how many people we know we've had expressing interest just simply from doing that one thing, because it is a central hub. I will hold my hands up though, because we have a rolling open fund that can be applied to any time. On that board, you actually have to put an end date for your listing, and I think mine's expired because I need to remember that you constantly have to refresh and repost something that is, you know, a constantly open opportunity. So I have a horrible feeling it's actually not live on the Creative Scotland opportunities board right now, but I'll certainly check and make sure it is. And then through word of mouth so far, and, you know, I admit freely that, you know, we should be doing more networking, and that's why I'm here. And because traditionally, as a funding body and as a sort of learned society, we've had barriers up between us and the creative world, and that's what we're trying to kind of bridge now. So Creative Scotland Opportunities Board was the low-hanging fruit, and it's borne lots of fruit for us and has been great, but we need to do better and reach out and reach further, and also provide, you know, make sure that we're really responsive and provide a lot of support to people once they do get in touch with us.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to slightly turn on its head now. I'm going to bring you in, Jonathan. So, like, how do you, an artist, and how do you find your scientists? Oh yes.
Yeah, so to answer the question, sorry, two mics in my hands. Feel like some kind of DJ or I don't know what.
I appreciate it, Jonathan. Thanks.
No worries. Yeah, so there was a bit of chat earlier about my approach to art, and it was being described as speculative. So a lot of work that I've done is been actually, rather than just kind of responding to an open call, I mean, the dream for an artist is there's an open call to an extent, and you apply for it, you get it. You don't have to think about anything other than your artwork. You get the venue, you get funding, your work gets promoted, everybody's happy, and especially yourself. The scientific community is great. There are lots of opportunities, especially to exhibit at festivals. But lots of these opportunities, you kind of have to forge them to a degree yourself, I've found. And please, audience members, when we're having the Q&A, step in, disagree with me, describe your own personal journeys if you have any. But yeah, so to find scientists to collaborate with, it's either been a kind of little kind of chain reaction that I've been introduced to scientists and this has led on to other opportunities. But most of the times it's been from directly just getting in touch with universities, like Edinburgh had the Beltane network, and saying, I have this project that I'd like to do, and seeing if anybody will respond. And I've also found a key part of that has been not just reaching out and saying, I'd like to work with somebody, but if I'm going to get a response from anybody, it's to say, I have this project, I'm aiming to have it as part of this festival, and I'm looking at this venue. And once there's a bit more kind of meat on the subject there, then I find that people are a lot more likely to respond. If I'm honest, the big part of being an artist and reaching out to organizations is most of the time people don't respond. But I have to say the organizations represented here are particularly good at it, which is perhaps how I've managed to rope them into being here in the first place.
So something that came up earlier, and I found really, particularly from the science festival point of view, Bill, was, and I think that would surprise quite a lot of people, is you weren't looking for a finished product when people were putting applications in. But what kind of an application makes you go, wow?
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. So I think what we do maybe is slightly different than what some other arts organizations do, in that we, like you say, we are very often looking for a finished product or something that's at least close to finished, because we, fundamentally what we do is we communicate science, but we're fundamentally an events organization. We're trying to put on a successful event. And so we're really keen to showcase something brilliant and something creative and something innovative, but it has to be something practical and sensible and that we can understand and that we can build, and that we have 100 and something events going on each year. So for each one, although we would love to spend months working with an artist, really teasing out what's going to make that piece of art perfect, we just don't have the time and the resource to do that. So something that makes us go, wow, that's going to work, is something where we can really see some thought has been put into the practical kind of delivery of the artwork. So whether that's, if it's something that's on a screen, do you know exactly what kind of screen? Do you know what kind of power supply it needs? If it's going to be like a built piece, a sort of sculptural piece, have you understood, what's the load on the floor going to need to be? Do we need to consider that? Or are we going to need to use a forklift to move it around or something like that? So as to enable us as easily as possible to work with the artist to put their art in front of people. And that's it. We just need to really understand. It's almost, I was saying this earlier to you on the video chat, we almost kind of take for granted that the work you're going to be doing is going to be innovative and thought-provoking and creative and interesting. And certainly from my point of view, I sort of assume by the time it gets to me that conversation's already happened. I want to know if it's possible and practical and feasible. So you have to be thinking about those two things in parallel.
Just because you really don't, the Science Festival is an event that takes place at a certain time of the year, so you really don't have the time to build up a long-term relationship with an artist. You're looking for someone who's got an idea that you can take from here to there and do it quite quickly. But Nicola, your organisation can't it?
Yes, we're in the fortunate position while we're around that we can do a lot of support and discussion and connect people up with sort of more technical people, with more academic kind of contacts with scientists, but can do a lot of feedback and stuff as well. So a lot of what we do when we do funding calls are kind of workshops and conversations and one-to-one conversations quite often to help people develop their idea so that it is a more fundable idea and it is a more feasible idea. So we can afford to take some stuff that is a bit more of a risk because we're trying to support stuff on the basis of it being research and development. So that is immediately going to be more risky anyway. And also because we have a lot of different people applying for funding, we get to do a bit of a mix. So some of the stuff that we fund in a given round will be very solid. We know it's going to definitely be deliverable. And then we'll also occasionally have things that we know are going to be very high risk, but if it comes off, it'll be amazing. And then we basically support to the degree that it needs. So there will be things that we'll pick up on. So sometimes you want to have like a longer ethics chats with people. Sometimes you want to talk about the business model they're going to use, which is important for us, which wouldn't be important for a display of artwork necessarily. But sometimes it's also that the person who's come in really needs to be connected to some very specialist knowledge around kind of data or data-driven innovation or sort of science and technology that they want to work within their piece. So yeah, we are privileged to have the time to do that and to have a really good network of people who can help us to do that as well.
Sorry, I didn't mean to grab it off you there. I know we're getting quite the baton passer here, aren't we? Because Michael, because you've got the big bounce in the Institute of Physics, but you've got this open call. So, what is it that you look for in an application that comes in that would make you want to go, yeah, I'll back that?
So with our grant scheme, we often fund projects to be developed, which we then actually host at our festival too. So the two are quite, the two avenues are linked. And what we're looking for is obviously creativity, because what we've seen traditionally is academics trying to put together public engagement projects, which are often quite business as usual. They can lack that innovation in terms of format and in terms of theme that people from the artistic world would come up with. But we also need the projects to speak to what our strategic, aims and objectives are at the time. And usually that is a really careful focus on audience, because what we want to see is, are you working with the right people, and have you considered that for starters? Not just about what the piece is, but who will see it. And then also, what are you hoping to happen with those people? What are you trying to see a reaction, attitude change? Are you trying to see them, make them learn something? So in terms of what the outcome on the audience, that's very prescriptive. In terms of the creative side of it, the weirder the better. In terms of the format, the weirder the better. The impact on the audience for us is everything, and that's the bit that does need to be quite narrow. And so our responsibility is to make sure that's really, really clear on our application guidelines, that this is what we want to see in terms of the impact on the audience and who the audience are going to be as well. So that you as an artist, don't waste your time putting together something that's not for the right audience. But in terms of the creative side, we want things that your average physics professor isn't going to think up when they're trying to devise their public engagement opportunities and projects.
It's a really interesting category, things that physics professors wouldn't think of.
And yeah, I know I'm doing them a disservice, because there are many very creative people in the physics community, but many that are, like to think in the traditional sense too.
Oh no, I've got no doubt, but it's what frightens me as a creative physics professor. Suddenly, what they could come up with,
Yeah,
with the warp drive. But Gemma, you were talking as well about your organisation is looking for cultural shift. So that means that if applications are coming in from artists, you're looking for something that reflects that, I'm assuming. What would that mean?
Yeah, so it's really interesting hearing all the different models which everyone has and thinking about where we sit, I guess, maybe if you imagine a sort of spectrum. And we do quite a mix of, I guess, the types of outcomes that we're seeking. But I guess a core aim of ours is really to inject, if you like, culture into climate change initiatives and to sort of harness all of the wonderful skills, ways of seeing the world and practices which artists have in many different forms. And we work with artists across all art forms. And to really bring that into climate change work. So in some cases, that means, so for instance, the Outer Hebrides project, which I was describing, the focus there was very much on community engagement. And so we were seeking artists who have specific skills in designing workshops, building sort of participatory environments, also helping to kind of explore people's visions for the future of the sea and bring that together into a kind of tangible message, if you like, that could be communicated back to communities there. So that had a kind of, I guess, quite a specific aim, which was around engaging communities and helping to reflect that back. We also have a kind of more experimental end of this work, which is actually about embedding artists in a project and trying not to prescribe what they're going to do. And trying to get them in there as early as possible. So at the moment, we're trying to develop a project based in Granton, where you might be aware there's a huge regeneration initiative going on in the north of the city. And climate change is a kind of core strand of how that development is taking place, that it needs to be net zero, it needs to be resilient to the impacts of climate change that we're feeling and will increase in future. So there we're making the case for an artist to basically be embedded in this huge regeneration project, not with one goal, but with a remit to kind of connect across all these different people who are involved in that, from engineers to communities to the council, and to kind of be this node of connection, but also kind of trying to push the ambitions of the project. So it's making links between all these different areas. And so in that initiative, we're hoping that the outcome is not really too preset, that actually the partners and the artists together can evolve a response over time. And I think, like you're saying, we kind of have the luxury of trying to determine these timeframes of working over longer time frames, because I think that's often where you get the most interesting results, where people aren't rushing to an outcome before you've necessarily considered all of the potential avenues, and actually you have that space to evolve a response. But that can be quite hard to make the case for to funders, and everyone's time is pressured, so it's a bit of a balancing act there.
Yeah, that's so. In other words, the word remit is much wider than we're used to seeing in these criteria. Jonathan, I mean, when you apply for things, what drives you nuts about the application process?
I think the fair answer to that is lots and lots and lots of things. I have to say, I actually prefer the application process for science events and funding. I do actually find that the application is a lot more straightforward. There's more about what your idea is going to be and what the outcome is going to be and how you're practically going to achieve it. Art applications, they want a lot of metaphoric kind of description of things, and they also quite often want to hear a lot about your previous successes, which to me seems quite unfair. I prefer applications to be about what the idea is itself and what the outcome is going to be, rather than have you previously had lots and lots of funding. So yeah, that is definitely a good thing about applying for applications in this way. Something I do find quite frustrating sometimes is open calls, if they're too open and they don't actually sort of specify what people want out of them. It is very good as a creative to have that opportunity and that freedom, but then at the same time, it's not so good if you come up with a weird and wonderful idea and it doesn't fit with the venue that the organization are planning on using in the first place. So I think on the one hand, it is good to offer people opportunity to be creative and come up with new ideas. On the other hand, if you know the specifics of the detail of when it's going to be shown or what you actually need, then I feel like that really needs to be shared in the application process. I'd say another bone of contention with applying for things in the scientific community is, well, first of all, thanks to the universities for all the funding opportunities. Secondly, unfortunately, they're incredibly slow at paying. And this can be a real barrier for people. Myself, I was funded by 3 different universities last year, and it was great to get the money and have that confirmed. It took, the quickest one to pay out was 6 months, and the other 2 took 9 months. And that's not untypical. So that is definitely a barrier. I think that is partially due to the way that universities process funding for external people. You have to apply as an external contractor, and that is a vastly long and faffy process. And I'm not sure why it is, or why they're getting away with it, or why other contractors are putting up with this. But I think once you've been through that process, it is quicker, but it is still slow. You'll still be looking at least a month before you get paid out for anything.
To use the American phrase, we all feel your pain. Do you know, that's a really interesting point, though, and I'm not sure how we're going to do this because I want to make this kind of quick fire round, so we'll have to throw the microphones. That could get quite exciting. Gemma, just duck if it heads towards you. It's bloody heavy. So do you think the language, because you've just said that, so do you think the language that science uses is completely different to the language that art uses? I'm going to start with you, Nicola.
Yeah, I'm just going to feel my own pain because everyone who pays out very slowly as a university. I'm so sorry on our behalf. Thank God. Yeah, the language is really different, and the language about innovation is radically different, which is something that we look for in the stuff that we're funding. The language about sort of how established you are and how confident you are is really different. So we found that a lot of what we've been doing is encouraging creative people to be confident about what they're presenting, because we get applications who are very technical and people who are very creative. And quite often our sort of more techie IT background people are quite confident in stating what a marvelous, fantastic thing they're doing. And our creative applicants are quite apologetic almost for extraordinary work that they've done. So there's a confidence thing. There's also just totally different kind of language about just expressing your work and what an output is and what a project plan looks like and how you budget for your projects. And again, the kind of artists underpaying themselves. The most common bit of feedback we give people on their budgets is, could you please pay yourself more? Like, I cannot tell you how many times I've written quite detailed feedback for people, including, please, could you pay yourself more? That is not a livable rate. That will not be a realistic project. So I think those are some of the ways. I am sure that, Virginia, I'm passing on, yes? Yeah. There will be others, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think even just today, I was asking what we all mean by open call as a concept. So I think just even things that you think are quite simple terms of language, you know, if you're moving from you know, sphere to sphere or whatever you want to say, just be aware that people use language differently. Like, I mean, I'm in science communication by background, and so I like to think that I'm always thinking that, but you just never know what people are going to be using language and how they're going to be doing it. But yeah, I think it's really important just to be aware of the differences.
Doing this, whoops, hang on. I've got to re-screw it slightly. It's got a bit loose on the bottom. You should never leave me with anything technical. You should know that. Honestly, it's ridiculous. So so Michael, you said that you've got your open call and all the rest of it going out. Do you ever use anything like networking opportunities?
In the world of science communication, public engagement, and in the physics world, yes. In the creative world, less often. But as we are kind of starting to reach out more and build up these links, then that's going to be something that we're going to be focusing on trying to do, because word of mouth is obviously a big part of it. So we've had a number of creatives be funded by a scheme in the last maybe year and a half that have been paired up with physicists from our membership and have put together projects in conjunction with physicists from our membership that for application to the funding scheme. So now they're in touch, and so not just me as the kind of administrator of the funding scheme, but our actual physicist members are now pals with these you know, sculptors and trapeze artists and people that are actually they're working together on projects with. So the networking opportunities are going beyond just the public engagement staff and actually extending to the physicists themselves, which is really nice. I tried to get a professor of gravitational wave astronomy to actually go on the trapeze that he the show that he assisted with the physics of, but he didn't want to do it. But that's kind of my dream, to really get them working together that closely. Yeah.
Well, that would be very close, actually, at some height.
Yeah.
I would imagine. I'm assuming that he already knows how gravity works. So that's
not in practical senses, they'll probably know.
Gemma, just very quickly, because you're in the community, or you should be. You're aiming to work more in the community. So, do you see yourself doing more networking events, or?
Yeah, I was just thinking probably the most exciting setting we had was on that barge boat that goes out to Wester Hales. We once ran an event on there, which no, it's you can sort of hire it out for events. No, I can't remember the name. The Union. It's one of the Union Canal boats. Yeah. Anyway, side note, but yeah. So we do probably our biggest sort of networking effort is around this series of events called the Green Teas, which I was telling you about earlier. It's meant to tickle your fancy, and that is really aiming to build links between artists and people working in different areas related to sustainability and climate change. So we have a rolling open call for those events for anyone who's interested in designing an event with us, and we can maybe help to bring in other relevant partners or help on the more practical or promotional side. It really depends what's needed there, and there's a small budget attached to that as well to cover fees for speakers and people organising. So that, yeah, I guess that's a sort of ongoing series, and it takes lots of different topics and forms. So the barge boat event was about how artists could be involved in sort of designing and making sure our green spaces were sort of helping to adapt to climate change and thinking about the role of our green spaces in building a more sustainable city. But yeah, they take lots of different forms, but that's our kind of main forum, if you like, for people to meet and collaborate, and that's how I met Jonathan as well.
First of all, can I just say, I think the title Green Teas is absolutely incredible and really amazing. And do you get much, I mean, how do people find out about it for a start?
So, well, I guess through events like this, we have a sort of mailing list specifically for that program. So if you're interested, I encourage you to just go onto our website. We've got a web page dedicated to that program. It's also got a list of all of the events that have been run since 2013, which is pretty amazing. So you can see what's happened before. There's more recently, in sort of past 3 or 4 years, we've been doing a lot more to document those as well. So you can go back and watch videos or read blogs or whatever. So there's a lot of content that we've generated through that as well. But anyone can sign up to that list and find out about what's going on.
So at the risk of you blowing your own trumpet for this lovely event today, Jonathan, do you think networking events are worth it?
I am not sure is my honest answer. Having been along to different types of networking events, I mentioned earlier, Creative Circles is a really good networking event, which is put on by Creative Edinburgh, and I have had a lot of opportunities come out of that. I think the dynamic of it is really helpful in that it's very relaxed and people have the opportunity literally just to wander up in person to other people who they might want to collaborate with. So that's certainly been very good. I have been to kind of one speed dating networking type event, which was artists and scientists getting together. For me, there wasn't any particular outcome from that. It was interesting, that was an outcome, but in terms of any projects which then kind of stemmed out of it, and I have to admit I didn't chase it myself, but I was perhaps a little bit put off by own experience of trying to work with scientists and professors in that they don't tend to get back to you, or they haven't got back to me unless there has been a nice clear outcome. So I'm interested to hear more, and I have asked, and Jim and perhaps other people who are involved in organizations who do these kind of speed dating events, I'd really like to hear, whenever it is possible, for them to actually try and collate some information and data as to what the number of outcomes are resulting from these. Does it have to be a case that scientists and artists have a planned outcome at the end of it for it to result in that? Or is it just enough to put people in touch and then hope that they'll find funding and they'll find an event to be part of or find a venue to display their work? I know there have been some other organizations like Fusion Art. We've got a member in the audience who, yeah, they do actually put artists and scientists together to collaborate on things with an outcome kind of exhibits that they organize. So I know it can be done, but I am very interested to hear from organizations themselves what the success rate is or how they evaluate that.
I think on that, because we also talked earlier on about the support that artists could get as they put their applications forward through, and each organisation has different levels of support. I was very impressed myself by the fact that so many of your organisations were willing to speak at an early stage of the application to artists, which is a very important thing I think people should remember as they're applying. And there actually are quite a few people from a lot of different organisations. I wonder if we should just open the floor to questions now and find out if there's anybody there who's got any questions they want to put to the panel. I'll have to run up with this incredibly heavy microphone, but it would get my step counter up, which would be really, really useful. Well, that would be rather marvellous, actually. Is there any questions you'd like to put to the panel? This is such an exciting moment, the tension in the room.
Well, it's the same question which we pre-discussed asking, which was kind of about mid-career opportunities. So Andrew here has an amazing exhibition which is going to be taking over this space. But then what do you do when you have that first big success? What are the next steps? Is it an agent? Is that what you need? Like, how do you, when you have an exhibition that is ready to go and not to be sold, but just to be shown to do science communication in other places, how do you do that? Oh, right, okay. Yeah, everyone else is mic'd up, not like own mics. I think it's just so that...
Oh, no, now we've got 3 microphones.
Okay, I'd like to answer this question in my own experience and then share it with the rest of the panel. So part of my kind of business model for myself is that having come up with an exhibit, even respond to the kind of open call, which is specific, and they say, we'll give you this much money for this, to produce this on this date. Or if I do something speculative and organize an event myself and the venue and even staffing, is I then look to tour it. I look to sell it and promote it to absolute death. So what I tend to do is I'll literally have a year where I make things, and then I'll have another year where I don't make things, and I kind of leapfrog between the two. Because the amount of investment in making art projects happen, both physically, mentally, emotionally, just absolutely every way, is absolutely exhausting and really difficult to make things in those time. So once I've invested all that time and energy, then I want to make the most of it. And also when I first conceived the idea, because there is, especially with speculative work, there is always the danger that it won't be accepted, or even if it is accepted, something will happen, like COVID will come along, or a venue won't have as much space as people thought they had. So in order to ensure that I'm going to appease the funders and the people involved and that I'm still going to look like a good horse to bet on in the future, I make sure that I'm taking that event, that exhibit, to several different events. So for example, Betty the Basking Shark, which I produced for Edinburgh Science Festival one year, she is also been at Glasgow Science Festival, if I'm honest. She's possibly going to be at Stirling Science Festival. She's been exhibited in response to COP. She's going about all over the place and having herself a nice little tour. Putting her together, producing her, and getting everything together in time, it was hard. And I'm definitely going to milk that for all it's worth. And same with my other exhibits. I've done lots of laser sculptures. Again, the idea with them was to generate attention and publicity, and as much as possible be able to sell it. And I find that's how I get a lot of my opportunities, is by basically creating my own buzz. And you get a certain level of credibility if your work's included in media and promotional activities. And again, that is a definite advantage to being an artist in the science community. Science events promote things really well. They get stuff in papers, and your work is a lot more likely to be heard of and seen, and they're just far better attended than art galleries.
Great answer. That was really interesting. That was a clash of language there with the use of the word agent, and I could feel sort of the science community was going, what? Isn't that somebody that spies on the Soviet Union? No. So you've got this interesting point where you've got artists who are creating work who are, let's call them mid-career. Does that matter to the Science Festival when people are making applications? Does it have to be somebody who's known, or will you take somebody at the very beginning of their career?
Thanks. I think it really depends on what we're looking to do with the piece of art, like where we're looking to use it, what's the kind of effect we're going to have, you know, what kind of audience response we want from it. Sometimes we're really keen to, you know, sponsor a new piece of work, a new kind of exploration of a theme that no one's thought about in that way before, and then we might well be looking for something new, something up and coming that nobody's seen before. Sometimes we're looking for something larger, more interactive, more robust, that can stand up to, you know, 1,000 or 5,000 people, you know, coming through it each day. And in that case, we will usually look for a more established company, a more established creation. But I think you're absolutely right, Jonathan, about like using the same piece over and over again. I mean, we a lot of the stuff we do out in Abu Dhabi, we use sort of, you know, mid-sized sort of mid-career artists, reasonably successful, but it's the same stuff. You can go onto their website, you can see the portfolio, you know, these are the different things you can get, and you can phone up and say, I want that one looks really cool. And he's like, right, well, you know, it's on display in Berlin, you know, that month, but you can have it after that. And that's, you know, we just know then that that's a real piece, it's solid, it's robust, and it will last. But yeah, absolutely, keep reusing your pieces. You're like, you know, why not? Like, send it around the world. If you've spent all that time and effort and emotional energy to create something, then use it again, sell it as much as you can. Make collateral for it. Make like a really neat little, you know, 200-word description of it. Make sure we've got some pictures of it that makes it easy for us to sell to our clients or to funders and things. You know, yeah, sweat your assets. You know, make them work. You've worked really hard to create it, so keep using it.
Sweat your assets. Sweat your assets. If that's a takeaway you take from today, it's sweat your assets. There's like Michael. I think Michael wants. Hi, Michael.
Yeah, I was. I think I totally agree with what Bill said. I think that, and what Jonathan said about reuse and getting your money's worth, as long as the audience is different every time. The only exception I would say is if you were producing a piece in collaboration with a community and you were co-designing it with them, and then it becomes inherently place-based and about them, and wouldn't necessarily translate to another audience, but that is more time-consuming and more resource-intensive way of working. It's great practice in public engagement and community engagement, and from our side, it's not something that we would probably fund others to do or haven't yet. It's more work that we would do ourselves. When funding others through the grant scheme, absolutely something that can be replicated is the way forward. And to go back to the original question, absolutely, if you're a newbie, that's absolutely fine. Everyone has to start somewhere. And if you can convince us that it's a well-conceived project, but you haven't got a massive amount of experience, then that's not a problem at all. As long as, you know, you can reassure us, and we would probably just ask for a conversation face to face in that situation. And then, you know, it's good to give people a leg up, especially as a lot of young people are coming up and doing this sort of thing, and not everybody sticks in the game forever either. So if you only ever stick with, you know, the known people that you've aware of before, they're going to start going on to other things eventually. So you need the you know, the fresh blood coming through as well.
This conversation's getting quite gory. What was
I made it sound menacing, didn't I? Sorry.
Yeah, fresh blood, spending your assets. I don't know what's. I mean that's a bit. So if taking even an earlier point in someone's career, I'm going to come to you now, Nicola. If somebody applies to you or somebody sees somebody they want to come to you, should they feel free to just come and talk to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like anybody else who's giving funding and support, we really, really want to have good applications to look at because we have, expert panels looking at the applications. They don't want to spend their time reading something that isn't fitting the brief, that isn't going to be appropriate. We would much rather have an early conversation with someone and either gently tell them that we're the wrong place and point them at someone who is the right place, because we try and make it always be a positive, useful conversation, or to give them a bit of a steer about what they need to do to bring it up to scratch. And a lot of that has to do with read the criteria that the people are looking for, because it maps the criteria. That is half the battle done. As long that is a standard thing that we're not going to be funding stuff that is not meeting our criteria. So make sure it meets the criteria. We'll help them do that. We'll have conversations about partners they might want to work with, which might include introducing them to people. And then when they apply, we'll give them feedback as well, whether they're successful or not, that will also point them to this might be a more appropriate funding source. This might be some other people you can work with. If they're successful, it might be like, and we've set up a meeting with some of these people. But yeah, we'd always rather have a conversation early. And then I know there are projects that we haven't funded that have had a successful outcome somewhere else. And that is like ultimate happiness for us. Like we've managed to be helpful whether or not we've given them money. And I think that for us is also about measuring what we've done. So Jonathan was asking before about how we measure whether networking is successful or not. And we actually do quite a lot of evaluation surveys, we do quite a lot of data capture. So we're kind of doing a big project to find out what has been working, what kind of interventions make the difference, and how much things like that kind of feedback on the process and one-to-one meetings ahead of applications going in kind of makes a difference to people. We've got anecdotal feedback that makes a huge difference. So, but I know that most funders and most people who are supporting work would rather have an early conversation. It's very rare, and it tends to be the very big ones that are very oversubscribed, where it's just a capacity issue. It's never a lack of wanting to have that conversation.
It's always good to come and chat.
Yes.
Absolutely. Jonathan, on the subject of applications, because you're one of the ones who does the applications, how long should you spend on an application?
If I can ask my friend and flatmate Sean Bevan to leave the room while I answer this. Yes, I exploit my friendship considerably on that one. I spend far too long over applications, and well, I say I spend far too long over them, but then if I don't get the funding or if I don't get the opportunity, then that's a waste. Whereas if I spend 2 weeks on an application and then I get it, well, that's not a waste. So yeah, for me, I do find it really difficult. And with funding applications previously, if I'm totally honest, looking at my own career, for the first several years of being an artist, I didn't bother with funding applications. I went, the amount of time and effort involved in these funding applications, I can work overtime at the day job and get myself the money and not even worry about the funding application. It's there, it's in my pocket, boom, done. I am now taking a different approach because in order to become more successful, more established, you do need the credibility of getting the funding, which means that I am doing funding applications. But yeah, for me, it depends. IOP is a wonderfully speedy process I've found, and I've applied to them and literally spent a day on an application form and had the money a few days later. Other organizations, Creative Informatics, the Connected Innovators application, it meant that much to me. I spent at least about a week and a half just filling the application form, and that's not allowing for all the work that went behind it in order to be able to answer those questions and boxes. So you could easily be talking about a month's worth of work to complete that application form. And like I say, it's also risk-taking, because these are people I'm speaking to and saying I'm looking to do this. If it doesn't happen, they're going to be asking questions.
Do you give feedback if people apply to you and they...
Yes. Yeah. But I think I can't remember who's saying it, about shaping the brief, like trying to be really clear what you're looking for. I think in the past we've sort of fallen foul of having quite open applications, and it just means you get lots and lots of applications, which means lots and lots of people's time, which in the end isn't going to go towards there's a limited number of spaces for a project. So I think we have gotten better over the years at trying to be very clear what we're looking for, and therefore actually having a lower number of applications in a way is a good thing, because you're helping people to funnel themselves through, so they're not not aiming at the sort of an opportunity that isn't quite the right fit for them.
Yeah, good advice. Always read the criteria. Has anyone got any questions? You want to stick? Oh, there we go. I've got a special mic runner at the back now.